get started just in a minute here. And so the beauty of what we're going to do today, right? I heard some of you say, I don't have any paper writing notes. I don't have, you know, I have my book. I didn't read the material, all of the material. That's all okay, right? So, but what's most important today, and the reason why that's okay is because all this is going to be captured on video, to where the audio, anything anybody says is going to be there, all right? And so, as I said before, I've never been a part of a book club. I don't know how book clubs work for the most part, so I'm implementing how I think the book club should go. And fortunately, for this particular book, there's a study guide, which he puts out, which you're going to see. I've got a PowerPoint presentation that we're going to kind of follow along, to where we get the bullet points from him. And then what I did was I went through and I pulled out what I felt to be the takeaways. But I don't want this to be about me, right? I don't want this to be about my discussion of what I think of the book. I want it to be more about you guys. And this particular book, the interesting thing about it is the first chapter, if you read it, it's kind of just setting you up for like who he is. There's really no huge value in what, you know, in what he's got going on there. There's a couple good points, and we're going to go through that. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 start to get more into it. And the thing I'm seeing about the information is that some of it isn't new, but some of it is new. Some of the terminology and some of the things that he says and the way he thinks about it, it's things I can recognize. I'm on there. Okay. So let me start the presentation. But the main thing that I want to do today is I want to get your guys' perspective on how does this apply? How do these key concepts and ideas apply to us? And how can we use these things? Because it's a little bit of a stretch, right? When we're talking about a hostage negotiator. I think it's interesting, but you know, it really comes down to, like for us, the first question I have is, we negotiate, right? But we don't really have the same kind of high stakes negotiation that, you know, when people's lives are on the line, right? But what is it? I mean, does anybody want to kind of share what they think? How can this book, how does it apply to how we negotiate and what we do?
I would just say that, okay, nobody's life is on the line, they're not lives at stake, but it is the biggest financial purchase of most people's lives. And there's a lot on the line. And if they're trying to sell and they need to get a certain price because they have something else they need that money for, these are highly charged emotional transactions. And that we have so many parties. It's not 2 terrorists and 5 FBI guys. We got to deal with, we have to negotiate so many different people along the way. The contractor, the appraiser. Not that I negotiate with appraisers, I dance for them, but no, I'm the other agent. Sometimes we're negotiating with the client, sometimes we're negotiating with the agent. It's not always the client. Sometimes the agent has their own little ego and they want to. So I just think, absolutely, there's a lot at stake. It's emotionally charged for sure.
So in the introduction, he basically talks about, all the information and tools and whatnot. And it really is, it's about psychology. It's about getting in the other people's mind is basically where he's going with this. In the first chapter, the goal was, and we know this about people, people want to be understood and they want to be accepted. Okay? They want to be heard. And I find when I'm using this stuff, when I'm using these techniques, normally it's a charged situation. Normally it's a situation where one of you has got sideways with one of your clients or some other person. Like I gave you the example of Billy this morning about, getting sideways and being able to diffuse the situation, right? And listen to them. And I find, not in every instance, but I find that when I use these tactics, and I didn't even know what I was doing in a lot of instances, right? I was just letting them tell me their story and trying to get behind and understand where they're coming from. And that's the secret, okay? Many times, but we're going to go through the bullet points. Our two primal urges, okay, as human beings, the need to feel safe and secure and the need to feel in control. And then listen intensely, demonstrate empathy, and show a sincere desire to understand what the other side is experiencing. And he says, I've heard him say in several of his talks, not so much in this part of the book, but he says in his talks that it only works on humans. The stuff works on humans. It doesn't work on animals, right? Because you're not going to have an understanding of an animal. But it really does work when you start looking at the circumstances. Let me see if I can close this down. All right. So these were the notes that I came up with. I mean, is there anything in the first chapter that you guys, that stood out to you, that you highlighted, that is something that you would think, that you think is a takeaway, something that you, like if you, I don't know if you do this or not, I have a tendency to highlight information in books that I like or that I want to remember, that I want to retain. Is there anything that in that first chapter?
I did. I'm trying to find it because I did highlight in your book.
So,
Trying to find it on my page here. So basically, it was the statement. I was on page 12, and it says that people are statistically more likely to act to avert a loss than achieve an equal plan. So to me, that just feels like this is also something that we can take and reflect on ourselves on the way we approach.
Could you say it again?
It says, I'm looking on my phone because I can't find it on the page. It says, shows how people are statistically more likely to act to avert a loss than to achieve an equal plan.
Okay, all right. So what does that mean to you? In other words, they
just act without really thinking it through instead of coming up with a solution that's equal, like an equal plan.
Okay.
You know, just like.
or they don't want to give up something.
Are they?
That's what
Yeah.
Yeah, the fear of loss.
They don't want to give up.
The fear of loss is stronger typically. I think that's what he's saying there, that they don't want to lose. They don't want to lose something.
That whole fear of missing out takes priority over the long vision.
Of what you have to gain, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Kim, what did you have?
It was the 4 steps on page 11. Separate the person and the emotion. Don't get wrapped in the other side's position and why they're asking for it, and establish a mutually agreed upon standard for evaluating those possible solutions.
Okay.
So, that's I know for my own self, I have to get myself out emotionally sometimes because I take it really personal and crap.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like I do have to step back a lot.
Yeah.
That's unusual, it's taking the emotion away.
I had another fellow Wall State agent tell me one time that Ellie, sometimes you have to take your heart out of the business because business is business.
Yeah.
And it's really hard. Yeah. But then one day he called me and said, how do I put my heart into it?
How do people negotiate? How do people negotiate when they're angry? How does that work? It doesn't work, right?
No.
He makes that point here in the book. In these first 3 chapters, he goes through that and he talks about, diffusing the anger and taking that angst out of it, because for whatever reason, when people want what they want and they're not getting it, some people have a tendency to get angry about it. And learning how to understand where they're coming from and getting behind their eyeballs is really where I'm taking these first 3 chapters out of this book. Is how do you get yourself to be experiencing their reality and why they think they're right with their position. And being angry, I mean, under no circumstances, and that's my first goal, just naturally and inherently, when we have somebody who's upset with us, is to try and find a way to, get them diffused and calm down.
I was just going to say one of the things that I think especially for those of us who have been in business for a while, is this is on page 30, and it says, going too fast is one of the mistakes all negotiating speakers are probably making. For too much effort, people can feel like they're not being heard, and we risk undermining the rapport and trust we built. And I think we do, because we've become mechanical almost over so many years, and you're just like, okay, like, we know the process, we know what we're supposed to do, slow it down, take a step back, because a lot of people haven't been through that process, and it's our job to establish that rapport and take our time to make sure they understand it. Yeah, we understand it. We get frustrated. I mean, it happens to me. I'm like, God, why are they not getting this? And then you're like, I do this every day. They don't do this every day.
Right.
So that was one of the things that really jumped out to me, was like, take your time, slow down, and establish that connection with people.
all that just makes people more comfortable.
I think instead of being involved with their emotions, there's another line where you can at least be empathetic with what they're going through.
Right.
They're not getting involved with the emotion.
He says you don't have to agree with their position. Okay?
Right.
You may not agree to it, right? You don't agree to where he's coming from, but you're at least showing that you're listening and you're giving them the opportunity to be heard.
That was the empathy, as
Right.
opposed to sympathy.
Right.
Sympathy was when you agreed with them.
Right. And give them a hug and,
Right.
and all that.
We can be empathetic with people we don't agree with.
Correct.
That's true.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And yeah, empathy is just demonstrating the fact that you
Yeah.
understand where they're coming from.
I liked how they, I'm not sure what chapter it was, how they encourage you to repeat.
Yeah.
What they say. The mirroring, yes. And the whole, I understand, and it sounds like.
Is there anything else in chapter 1 that you guys?
I had highlighted that on page 16, it all starts with the universally applicable premise that people want to be understood and accepted. Listening is the cheapest yet most effective concession we can make to get there. By listening intensely and negotiating discernment demonstrates empathy and shows a sincere desire to better understand what the other side is experiencing. Because it's just, I have a lot of mental traffic. You know, who knows me? I have a lot of mental traffic. And so, this just, listening is, just to really listen, to really not have my mind going while people are talking is hard for me. But clearly, that's the key to empathy. So.
Well, he says in that chapter, contrary to popular opinion, listening is not a passive activity. It's the most active thing that you can do. And that's so true. I think none of us are really good listeners. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Some of us may be better listeners than others. But we're always on to the next, typically we're always on to the next thing. We're always thinking about where it is that, how we want to respond to the situation as opposed to really hearing and really, understanding what that person is saying.
And also the not responding right away.
Right.
But taking a beat before you speak, and at least me.
Right.
I mean, I'm really quick to answer.
Let there be silence, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's really, there's nothing wrong with silence.
Yeah.
I think that ties really good with what Michelle pointed out, is just take your time, and the whole listening is take your time while listening. We hear them, but then we're like, oh, we know what we're doing, so then we're so quick. It's just all ties together, slow down.
That's why I like take notes as somebody, and then I'll ask them to repeat, just so that I know I'm listening, because I have to remind myself to listen. Otherwise, I get halfway through the conversation, like, I don't remember your name.
Yeah.
I don't remember your, and then, but if I start writing it down, then I'll say, one more time, what did you tell me about? And that's the way that I help. And it helps, and people really then think you're listening, they really appreciate that you're like writing down what they're saying.
Yeah, so that's a really good hack that Michelle just mentioned, right? And I'll tell you, I do the same thing. Whenever somebody walks into my office, I always pull out a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And I'm ready to write down whatever, to make a note of what, because my memory's horrible.
Yeah.
And so I have to write it down. And you're right. I know that makes people feel better that you're actually.
They totally do. And they're, and I will. And if I forget, I'm like, I was writing these notes down, but I know you told me something else. And, try to, and they're like, then they really get into it. It engages them.
Yeah.
But it helps me because I seriously, it'll go right out the other side so fast.
I liked the part they said about the waiters.
I love that.
You know, instead of just agreeing, like, yeah,
70%
yeah,
higher tip.
and repeating what they said, like,
It'd be
if
like,
we do it
great
like
choice.
this, or,
Great choice.
yes,
So good.
yeah. They got a better tip.
I'm gonna tell Barbie that.
I was off this, said it really quick, I got a text that some people have been logged off.
Oh, yeah.
Oops.
Okay, hang on one second. Let's see, managing our participants. Jackie's phone, so she's readmitted. Welcome back, Jackie.
How weird.
We're still learning how to use this system.
The other ones look like they're on there.
Yeah, they all, looks like they're all there. Jackie's the only one.
Susan, oh, she's there.
Susan's there. Okay.
Is that Susan's?
But they can't,
Yeah, Susan's part's on it.
But they can't participate.
I had something on chapter 1.
Well, we're not, I don't want, I'm not, yeah, for the recording, otherwise, I mean, they can listen in, but otherwise they'll be talking, and all that. Okay, let's move on to chapter 2.
Can I ask one more thing?
Yeah, please.
On page 7, after that whole scenario with the Harvard student, he says, I'm just asking questions, I said. It's a passive-aggressive approach. I just ask the same 3 or 4 open-ended questions over and over and over and over.
Oh, I love that.
They get worn out until you give me everything I want. I had 2 thoughts on that. I thought, okay, that's so much of what we do, is asking questions. Like when you're buyers, you're constantly asking questions. Well, what's important to you? And do you like the steep slope? Would you rather have a level, blah, 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 all that stuff. And then I thought, this strategy is so foreign to me than just asking open-ended questions and then hoping to get what you want out of it. Because I'm so like, let's just cut to the chase, let's get to the point, let's see what everyone wants and figure it out. And this just seems so like kind of fluid and like, how do you know you're gonna get where you wanna be? So I was curious if anyone had like an example of how you've used this in real estate maybe to get what you want, or I was trying to think of how we could apply it.
Yeah.
Maybe an overpriced listing.
If you're always asking the questions though, you're also controlling the conversation.
Yeah.
Which is a good technique.
Well, I think we get to it later in the book where he talks about the stages of change a little bit in there, and I put it on your post in our thing. Because I think the questions give us, when we ask those questions, it reveals, are you gonna buy in the next 6 months or a year? Like, what kind of big transition in your life are we looking at right here?
Right.
And it allows you to be someone who hears what they're saying, and then maybe 6 months for, you might not get that product right now, but 6 months from now you will.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I was thinking in negotiation.
Yeah.
Like when it comes to like negotiating repair requests or a price reduction or something like that.
I had a question about that. Okay, so when you throw out that, well, how am I supposed to do that question? What if when they come back and say, well, you're supposed to do your job, or that's what you do? I mean, how do you answer back? You just
Maybe that means like they should use that dealer with the other agent.
Yeah.
Aren't you, I mean, you're not just negotiating with the buyer or the seller, you're negotiating with an agent who's hostile sometimes,
It
right?
would be easier with the agent, yeah, but I was just
Yes.
wondering, how can I say that?
So when that question comes up, I'll say, well, what is it you think I'm not doing?
Yeah.
They a lot of times cannot seriously come up with, well, you should be holding more open houses. Well, why do you think that is gonna help?
Right.
Right.
They want what they want, and
Exactly.
they're looking for reasons, and you have to turn it back on them.
Well, what is your idea of what I should be doing? I mean, I've gone to a couple people, and then they're like, oh, you really,
It just sounded good.
What is it
Yeah.
that we should be doing that we're not doing?
Yeah.
What are those things?
Exactly.
So last week, when I was writing an offer for a client, they came back and they said, oh, and by the way, for me to move forward with this, I want you to credit back X amount of your commission to me. And I stopped and I took a beat and I said, let me understand. You want me to take less for my professional services and hand it to you. And then I stopped for a moment and I said, where do you think I'm not representing your best interest, that I don't deserve to be paid for working for you? And that might not have been the best phraseology, but I was with a really aggressive guy, really. And so I didn't want to take that softer approach. And he was like, you're absolutely right. Never mind. I thought I would try it because I saw on Reddit. I just had to ask, and I just had to like flip it back. And so
Well, that's the total mirroring that he's talking about in chapter 2, is that you turn it back and we reiterate his thoughts, like, well, why did I come up with that? So I think that's great.
Did you use your late night sex
Yeah.
That's not gonna happen.
this virus going around, right? I'll lay it out.
So we kind of spilled over a little bit into chapter 2, right? So that's okay. That's good. That's the way this should go. There's no right or wrong in this thing. But let me go through his bullet points real quick. Goal of preparation: reveal potential surprises in negotiation. He says somewhere in there that good negotiators know that there's going to be potential surprises. Great negotiators go find those surprises and uncover as much information as possible. Actually, hypothesis versus assumptions. Don't assume the position. Don't assume where things are going. Keep an open mind to what potential solutions or some way that you can make the deal come together. Uncover as much information as possible. Don't prepare a counter argument. Uncover what your counterpart actually needs, money, time, emotional needs, etc. Help them feel safe in order to help them open up and talk more. Your primary focus, the other person and what they have to say. So his big thing here is uncover as much information as possible, and don't be thinking about, how you're going to respond to them. Okay? Think about those questions that you're asking them. He has a lot in there about smiling, right? Okay, the fact that you're more productive, I think it was 31% more productive when you're in a good mood, when you're in a happy mood versus being in an angry mood. Michelle talked about slowing it down. And then the 3 tones, late night DJ voice, positive and playful, which is where we spend most of our time. Okay, that's where we want to spend most of our time. And then the direct and assertive tone, we use that sparingly and use it in a fashion to where they still feel safe, right? That they're okay. Like even though you're being assertive, like when you say, I don't do that. Okay? There are going to be certain circumstances where you have to be very assertive with the client in response, but you need to find a way and a tone to be able to tell them that in not a defensive way, but in a way that they feel comfortable. Mirroring, we all do this, right, to a certain extent, but can you see how this mirroring can really work to your advantage when we've heard of NLP, okay, the language, the study of language, NLP, and the way you say things and how you say them and how you demonstrate your body language and your tone is almost as much as what you're saying, what's coming out of your mouth. And so this whole mirroring exercise, very simple, right? Basic, involving repeating the last 3 years. The last 3 words. When they say something like they want you to give them part of your commission, you say part of my commission, question mark, and you don't say anything else, right? You just leave it at that and let them expound, let them restate.
You just start walking.
Right? And allow that circle, allow them to communicate more where you can get a better understanding. Well, why is it you want that? Like, tell me more. I don't quite understand why. That's the tone, right? When you're mirroring, is help me understand where you're coming from in that particular situation without getting defensive, without being emotional about it, just matter-of-factly, right?
I think sometimes when you repeat that sentence back to them and they hear their own words, they're like, oh, I'm embarrassed now. Yeah.
Think of all the ways that we justify our position, justify with our resume and who we are and all the great things that we're going to do for the client to justify our fee. Think about like going through that whole process. They don't care about that. I mean, at the end of the day, they want to be heard that they want a portion of your commission. You hear them, okay, but you create a situation where it's safe. You start to make them feel good about the fact that you're listening to what they're saying. That doesn't mean you're going to give it up. Okay, you're not necessarily going to give up the commission. Use as connectors because they help your counterpart link thoughts. The mirror process. Use your late night DJ voice. Start sentences with "I'm sorry" to earn the benefit of the doubt. Mirror the last 3 words or selected words. Be silent. And let them fill the gap. You don't necessarily need to fill the gap. For at least 4 seconds to let the mirror work its magic, and then you repeat it. Okay, so in that second chapter, was there anything else that stood out for you guys as far as bullet points, takeaways, things that maybe you highlighted in those chapters, and then how do they really apply to what we do? Anybody? Kim? Yeah, go for it.
Well, because I always have a voice in my head. So the treat 2 schizophrenics with 1 pill.
Yeah, I underline that as well.
Yeah, because it is true. You need to make them feel good, the safe part. But I also have to quiet my own mind.
Yeah.
So that kind of stops me on that.
Yeah.
Just finding a way to come to I guess, a good emotion on their side and on my side and finding out what they want.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I highlighted a lot here, but when deliberating on a negotiating strategy approach, people tend to focus all their energies on what to say or do, but it's how we are, our general demeanor, delivery is one of the easiest things to enact and the most immediately effective mode of influence. And the whole mirror thing, I love with this and in the labeling thing, the next thing. He says they're not easy. Like it takes practice. These are not just, you just can't come out of the box and be great at that. It takes some practice, but it's the same, it's really all the same. It comes down to listening. Mirroring, like from my perspective on this chapter was that it's not really an action much. It's really just listening and just letting them know,
Yeah.
You're not doing anything. That's it. You're there. You're not doing anything yet. All you're really doing is just letting them, get their thing out, letting them know you feel it. The NLP thing is way more specific, and I remember reading about that or being in a meeting about it going, you never do this, but I have done it with clients. So I had a woman who was very tight, very, very reserved, very ready to think I was a salesy real estate agent. And the second time I went out with her, I actually dressed like her. And you know what? We're friends now. Yeah. But, I just needed to get past her defenses. So I literally married her. But, yeah.
So I highlighted, it's really not easy to listen well. We're easily distracted. We engage in selective listening, hearing only what we want to hear. Our minds act on a bias for consistency rather than for truth. And I think that is really a key element, that we already think we know the answers, okay, when we're dealing with someone, as opposed to really actively listening to them and cutting away our own bias, okay, because we want it to be a certain way. We want it to be, we think that we know what the other person really wants. And allowing yourself to stop being in that position where you're maintaining that thought process allows you to be open to what really the truth is. What is it that they're really looking for? And his one tip here on discussing what she was talking about with the voice in your head is that the powerful way to quiet the voice in your head is to make the sole focus on the other person and what they have to say. Listening to them will disarm your counterpart. The voice in their head will quiet down as well. Okay? So not only will your head quiet down, theirs will as well, because you're listening to them. Anything else in this chapter that you guys, I'm just looking through mine here. You said the most powerful tool in any communication is your voice.
Yeah.
Your inflection, like your tone and how you say what you're saying versus what you're actually saying.
Oh, what was really, really interesting in here was that when he's working, he's talking to the two guys in the bank, he says that the person says, I'm not the important person, my other guy has to make all the decisions, that's always a lie. He said when the person's saying, I'm not the one who's making the decisions here, that means they are the one making the decisions here. And then he said vice versa, which I was trying to get my mind around that. So if I say, if someone's saying,
I am in charge.
if they say I am in charge, that means they're really not the one in charge. It means their wife's in charge.
So yeah, the husband and wife. When he says she's the boss, and he really doesn't care.
Right, it means he says she's the boss, then yeah, he's probably going to make the decision.
So when he talks about the positive, playful voice, he also goes on to say that the positive, playful voice is where you should be most of the time. Easygoing and good-natured, light, encouraging attitude, relax and smile when you're talking. Okay. Even on the phone, a smile can shine through.
Right.
Okay, so if you focus on the fact, even going into troubling situations, I can tell you when I was talking with Billy that, going back and forth on the text this morning, I had a big old smile on my face via text. He probably couldn't see it, he couldn't feel it, but I focused on that maintaining that good attitude. And he goes on to say, a smile on your face will increase your mental agility. I thought that was really a powerful statement, that you become a much better person, a much better version of yourself when you're smiling, when you're happy, when you have that good energy, as opposed to when you're buried in that negativity.
Low vibration.
Absolutely.
Well, resting bitch face. We all do it.
I don't do it. I think too, sometimes you forget, when you're talking to somebody, we get calls that come through the front and stuff that,
you know, where sometimes people are upset and, you know, you take it personal sometimes, and then like the other day I found myself getting a call like that, and I didn't even realize until after I got off the phone, like I totally just did what the book said, which is I said to her, I'm like, you know, I know you're upset, but I'm trying to help you. Like, just calm down, I'm just trying to help you. And as soon as I said that, she was like, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. I've just been sick and I'm frustrated, I'm so sorry. And then she was like all apologetic because she realized, wait, all I'm trying to do is get you to the right person.
Right.
So I think that it's just remembering that if you tell someone how they're acting, that they know how to, then they realize what they're doing, right, to respond better.
Isopraxism, does anybody know what that word is? I mean, I just find that a really interesting word. So mirroring is also called isopraxism, okay, and it's imitation. We do it in an effort to comfort each other. Like Paula said, dress like that other person, right? Speech patterns, body language. I mean, do you ever find yourself like when I go to Texas, and I'm down in Texas, I start talking like a Texan, right?
Yeah.
You know, to build that bond, to build that, right? You guys do that, right? We all do that.
No, but then I get self-conscious.
Or if you're around Sophie and Johnny, you start talking like a Brit. I don't think it is offensive. I don't think it is offensive to a Texan because that's how they all sound. Right?
Yeah, they don't even
Like what happened to your California accent?
It's like when you're around a hyper person or a very mellow person. I tend to be more mellow if your personality is, and if they're high energy, like you
So the definition of the isopraxism is an impulsive tendency. So like when other people stand and clap, you stand and clap. So you start to imitate and dress the same. Like she said, they're calm, you're calm, vice versa.
So mirroring is the art of insinuating similarity. Trust me, a mirror signals to another unconscious. You and I are alike, so you're trying to, that's the purpose of the mirror. I thought this was interesting. The negotiator mirror focuses on the words, nothing else. And I had to read that like 3 times. I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that. But he basically is talking about, it's not about, like, you're not going to mirror a Iranian accent. That's not for a negotiator. The Iranian is the terrorist is going to be, and I'm not saying all. I shouldn't have said it that way. But you know, ethnic imitation is typically not an effective way as far as the negotiating goes.
I also think you don't want to
backfire.
Your emotions. If they're yelling it at you, you don't want to yell back. So you don't want to mirror the emotions as well.
Correct.
Right.
So like that in one statement.
I feel that interesting that they thought psychics would make good FBI negotiators because they listen and they're able to respond back to that person exactly what they want to hear.
Yeah.
I felt that pretty interesting.
Yeah, for sure, Jeannie. Here was the actual statistic. The average tip of waiters who repeat back the order, okay, rather than giving some positive reinforcement, was 70% higher. Yeah, so that was your. For a mirror to be effective, it has to sit there and do its work. That's, again, reinforcing the fact you need to let there be silence. Let it work. Being right isn't the key to a successful negotiation. Having the right mindset is. And then pitbull on pitball leads to a messy scene. Try the 4 simple steps. Michelle, I think who stated the 4 simple steps?
Kim.
Late night, late FM DJ voice. Start with "I'm sorry," mirror, and silence, and then repeat on those 4 steps. So we talked about this a little bit before, that the intention behind. Let me see who this is. So Dieter needs to get in here. Am I muted? No, I'm not muted, right? Okay. The intention behind, he's muted. The intention behind most mirrors should be, please help me understand, right? That's really where the mirror is coming from. When you're repeating back to them, you need to have the body language and the tone of the words that you're repeating back to them to say, look, help me understand where you're coming from here, right? The mirror will give you clarity while signaling respect and concern for what the other person is saying. And the bottom one is mirroring is awkward at first and it takes practice, but once you get it, it will serve you well. And I think that's true. I've been really trying to think through this over the last, I've read these chapters 3 or 4 times, probably 4 times in the last 2 weeks. And, just trying to get a grasp of how does this stuff really apply to us? And how, what can I say to you that you can use this mirroring, in order to preserve your commission or to get the listing or something like that. And I think every situation is different, right? That's really what it's hard to be able to do that. It would be interesting to go through that exercise to figure out what is the script to, because you're in a negotiation with the seller a lot of times when you're sitting at the table trying to get the property listed for sale, right? And to be able to ask the right questions. I don't know what those questions are. Does anybody have a thought on that?
Or what?
Well, so you're negotiating with it. You're basically, I guess, is it really a negotiation? I think it is a negotiation when you're trying to get a listing.
Yeah. Yeah, you're negotiating you into the transaction.
Right.
Or trying to become a part of that.
So maybe it'll be revealed later in the book. I don't know some of the tools that we have available to us. I don't know that mirroring immediately. It seems to be it's more conflict resolution.
So when you're asking.
I would think
what
mirroring
they
will
want
put them at
from
ease
you
so that
to
they'll
help you
feel
get a
more
better grasp
comfortable.
of what
We
they
do this
expect
with
you
you.
to do, just to
Right.
go deeper.
Right.
Well, and being
So-
someone who's not selling herself is, I think, you posted that, or you said that thing on our meeting on Thursday, right, about when we don't have to
Yeah.
sell ourselves. I think that mirroring and listening to someone
Right.
puts you in a whole different bracket, I think.
Right.
As businesses.
You're not selling
Yeah.
yourself, but you're showing your listing.
Well, and it's funny because I ended up going on a listing appointment the other day that I didn't know.
You didn't know what?
I didn't know it was a listing appointment. I didn't know the guy really wanted to list his house with me.
Okay.
I had a whole different mindset. It's really weird because he came in the office and he said, I have somebody who wants to buy my house. I just want to get a value. Can you give me an appraiser's number? And I said, well, don't pay an appraiser. I said, I can tell you what the value of your house is, so you don't get ripped off.
Yeah.
I'll come over, I'll give you comps, whatever, no problem. So I went over there thinking that was what I was doing.
Mhm.
I'm gonna list his house.
Mhm.
He's like, well, that guy doesn't want to pay what I want. I want you to list my house. But I think going in there, my mindset was so completely different than so I wasn't selling myself, I wasn't.
You were hearing
I
that.
was hearing him. It was really weird because I came out there thinking, holy crap. I didn't do paperwork, normally I have like my presentation and then, whatever, and I was all prepared, but I still walked in there, I listened to what he had to say because it's kind of a unique situation. He was like, I had a dog there that he was babysitting. He's like, I'm so sorry about that. I'm like, I have 4 dogs, I love dogs. And it was just like more of a conversation. And I think a lot of times we forget that, but I think that's all part of this, listen.
Soft sell.
And I was selling myself.
So
Like, no.
what I hear about that, when I hear you describe that situation, what comes to mind to me in that particular situation is that it's all about them.
Mhm.
Like it was all about him.
Yeah,
Like
I was just doing my
he was
thing.
asking your
Yeah.
advice.
Mhm.
Okay, he was asking your advice, and you were just conveying that information. You weren't
You're
in the
right.
position to tell him all about you.
No.
It didn't matter. Okay, and that's a great place to be. I don't know how you guys open up a conversation when you go into a listing presentation, but when I sit down with someone at the dining room table, the first thing I say that comes out of my mouth is, "So what are we doing here today?" Right?
Yeah.
I just open that open-ended question, and what are they going to say? They're going to say a lot of different things. Who knows what they're going to say? But we just want to get to know you. Okay? Or, well, what would you like to know about me? And you put it back on them to understand. I was watching a video on this particular guy, and he was talking about, we go through our 12 bullet points, we have our presentation, we go through this is us, this is it. These are all the things you should know, Mr. Sauer. And his point is that only 2 of those 12 mean anything whatsoever to that seller.
Yeah.
So the question is, what are we doing here, and what questions can I answer for you?
It's hard to slow down.
Yeah,
Like you
and
said, slow
you
down.
just put it back on them and let them tell their story. And I think that's where this, and then when they say it, then you repeat it back to them. Whatever it is, whatever comment comes out of their mouth, you're reinforcing so that they know that you're listening. This is what we want to see happen here. What we want to sell, obviously we want to sell our house.
I think that if I can expand on that idea a little bit, and it goes a little bit outside the book, is that I commonly do that type of thing. What are we doing here?
Mm-hmm.
But if you know your disc personalities, you know if, based on what they answer, you know if you need to head more towards mirroring back to them and establishing that personal rapport, or if they're straight numbers and you need to go to your listing presentation. I think that once you figure out if you need to mirror and do this or jump there, half the time your listing presentation doesn't even come out.
Right.
But don't automatically jump into the presentation. Take the time to ask the question and let them tell you what they need. And that will give you the direction you need to go.
I think where it goes really badly is when you show up there and you just throw up. Like you just you give them everything. I mean, like you just throw it like bam, and you hit him in the side of the head with the kitchen sink. They don't want to know about any of
I think the biggest part of your presentation is getting to know your client.
Exactly. Because some are numbers people and some aren't, so you need to know.
Right.
You don't want to throw a bunch of statistics at them.
I
just want to
try to do some background research on the person
Yeah.
too, because I don't want to go into a guy that's a CPA and give him something that he doesn't want to hear. So
Sure.
I always try to research my clients as much as I can.
Yeah.
Just because it helps you kind of learn what kind of personality you're coming into.
Right.
And I bring a notebook always to listings too, but I ask them, I'm like, are you comfortable? Is it okay with you if I take some notes about the things you're telling me? And people love that though. They love that. And it really does help when you go later to write the remarks about the house, and you can write the thing that was their favorite thing about the house.
I take a file folder with me and write it on the front of the file folder. I already have the listing. I've got my file folder ready and open it, and I'm gonna write this on the file. So.
Oh, awesome. Oh, yeah.
That's a good idea.
And they're all on there.
Okay, so let's move on to chapter 3.
I'm ready.
And it talks about tactical empathy. Okay, imagine yourself in a counterpart situation, recognize their perspective and vocalize, demonstrate that recognition, understand your counterpart's feelings and hear what's fueling those feelings. Focus your attention on identifying emotional obstacles that are standing in the way of an agreement. Analyze your counterpart's words, tones, and body language, and spot changes therein, and look for incongruencies. So with labels, okay, this is starting to really get into the meat and potatoes of the book. This is some powerful stuff. And labels serve to validate your counterpart's emotion by verbally acknowledging it. Start with, it seems like you're upset today. It seems like you feel that something really hasn't gone the way it should have gone. And silence, right? And allow them to respond and be acknowledged and be heard. It sounds like, it looks like. Okay. Not, I see that, or I'm seeing that, right? Because that ends up personalizing it to you. After filling in the blank, pause to let the label sink in. Your counterpart will fill in the silence. Every fourth verbalization should be a label. This is also something that I had a hard time coming to grips with. Okay, how do you actually do this? Neutralizing the negative. So focus first on clearing all the barriers to an agreement. Labeling your counterpart's fears, negative perceptions to diffuse them of their power. Avoiding negatives has a counterproductive effect on trust and influence. It probably seems like we're avoiding responsibility by changing the account owner. I don't know what that means. Steps for diffusing negatives: observe and listen without reacting or judging. Sometimes hard, right?
Yes.
Okay. Label each negative feeling that you hear expressed. replace with a positive, compassionate, and solution-based thought. And then the accusation audit was, imagine the worst things your counterpart might think or say about you, label these negatives in your opening line, and be preemptive with empathy. Use labels to reinforce and encourage positive perceptions. Remove I understand from your vocabulary. This phrase does not demonstrate understanding and can breed resentment. So they take it in a negative way. So in that accusation audit,
It's just patronizing.
in that, yeah, it's patronizing. In that accusation audit, right? So for example, let's say that you're going out and let's say you're called out on a listing presentation to Pressline. Okay? And you're a Lake Arrowhead agent, but you really want this listing in Pressline, right? And in the back of the mind, is it ever going to be in the back of the mind of the seller or the client that you're a Lake Arrowhead agent? You're not a Crestline agent.
They'll say that to you.
Right. So what he's talking about here is you bringing that up, okay, in advance. Okay, you presenting that fact that, you know, what's the worst thing that's something bad that somebody could say about you if you really want that listing in Crestline, right? So you find a way to use this tool to bring it up to them in advance. That's really, so I was trying to think of an example of how this, you know. Well, anybody?
You may not think that I sell in Crestline, but actually I do a lot of deals here.
Yeah.
This is my
Yeah, our whole market area is mountain wide. You know, I just want to let you know. So you're putting that, because if it doesn't ever come up, let's say you go through your whole and you hit it off fantastically, but you never raise that issue and take the negative away, it's still maybe in the client's mind, and they choose not to. So you're addressing it up front so that they go, oh, well, I never really thought about that.
What if they never really would have thought about it, and then now they're wrong?
You take the negatives and you take the negatives and you turn it into a positive.
Well,
right?
I think that kind of goes with, if you're thinking it and you think this client's thinking it, then that's sort of an insecurity that you have.
Say that again?
It's an insecurity.
No, what was the, if you think what?
If you're thinking it and you think your client's thinking it.
Then it's mixed, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that, I can't remember which one it was, but David Goggins, I don't know if you guys know that.
Yeah, sure.
He says that a lot too, is, I think even a lot of people do, Gary Vee and everyone, are like, point out your insecurities before anybody else can. Those are your weaknesses, but you're gonna make them your strength.
Yeah.
And so.
It's kind of like the elephant in the room. We all know
Yeah.
it's here, but you know,
Yeah.
let's just get it out.
Well, and that makes you more comfortable. I mean, you guys are,
Yeah,
you know, my thing about is usually talking about rates and fees. I mean, that's the boom. I just get right out there, and you know, when people say, "Oh, well, I'm shopping for the cheapest rate," great, you know, and I mean, that's like the first thing that I get, and it's like, well, you know, there's always going to be a lower rate somewhere, but you know, it's the service behind that, and
So I have a very similar presentation and pitch. When someone sits down in my office and they want to join Coldwell Banker Realty, I tell them flat out. So I'm doing this without even knowing what this is. I tell them flat out because, and what I tell them is, you can go get 100% somewhere else. You can get a better split somewhere else. But I will guarantee you that you're not going to make more money anywhere else than you are here at the end of the year.
I can remember
No matter what
you
you
saying that to me.
Is it true? Is it true? That's true. I mean, it's a true statement. But see, that's a weakness that, you know, I want a better split. I want a higher split.
Yeah.
You know, some people want that. You know, they don't want the service that comes along with it. They don't want the energy.
Well, they don't know that they don't, but they don't understand what comes with
Right,
it.
but you have to point that out and help them understand. Well, what do you mean by that, Steve? You know, and then, you know, well, what's important to you? You know, how much you make at the end of the year, or how much you make on one deal?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So I had no idea. I mean, and as I start thinking through, am I using this stuff? But I think once you're aware of it, okay, and you look at your weaknesses, like what if you're a single agent as opposed to a team? Do you think that should come up in the conversation about what the advantages of working with me as a team member? I mean, as a single agent versus necessarily a team? Because there could be some advantages for that. Don't know what they are. But that clearly, you know, the strength of a team versus someone who's an individual agent, I could see where in a seller's mind that might be an issue.
You just put your sign on your forehead, doesn't play well with others.
In chapter 3, what came out of chapter 3 that you guys had as far as takeaways, things that you felt were important?
Empathy is not agreeing with their perspective, but acknowledging it.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between empathy and sympathy?
Yes.
Okay.
Was chapter 3 the one that they talked about bullying, and that's kind of like the past? People aren't as, remember that in the old days, I can remember, the agents would just try to bully each other to get in. I think in chapter 3, he said that's kind of like
I don't remember
in the
that.
past.
I think it's a little further.
Did you go?
I'm done.
Yeah.
I think that probably the biggest takeaway from this chapter for me, and I've read this book so many times, is going back again to that accusation audit. I think that if you really think about the different things that you can kind of unmask for your client, like if you've got a buyer and it's their first time buying a house, I didn't even realize I was doing it. It's a script I picked up years ago and just modified it, where as we're signing their offer, I say, okay, look, seriously, there's gonna come a point at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're gonna wake up and wonder, what the heck am I doing? And you're going to want chocolate and you're gonna want wine or whatever it is. Take a breath, call me, I'm here to help you through that, we'll take care of it. You know, something along those lines, because if you get in front of the potential problem and you diffuse it, you take away that fear, because that whole unknown can get really big in somebody's head, right? And that then paves the way to creating more problems. But if you've got the experience to understand what needs to be diffused ahead of time, turn it into a little bit of empathy, comedy at the same time, so that they know you're approachable and they can come to you and they don't have to take it all on by themselves, it can go a long way. That's the constant accusation audit, and I'm going to be using it on you guys this year as the association president.
I like the fact that what he said here, there's a title on this, where he says, most of us enter verbal combat. Most of us enter verbal combat, okay, when we get into these situations. And it's unlikely to persuade anyone of anything, because we only know and care about our own goals and perspective. We're not going to get to common ground because we're so focused on the battle and fighting the battle. And maybe that goes back kind of to what you're saying, Marty, where the old school way of doing it was you're like, I mean, do you ever get into those deals where you're working with another agent and it's just like, it's like a fight. It's like a fist fight. You feel like you've got a fist fight. And does anybody win in that circumstance? No. Nobody does. I mean, in fact, most of the time the deal goes sideways. You don't get to common ground.
You gotta kill the other person.
There's still, and there's like so ridiculous.
He says for most people, when he's talking about this is all about labeling. So when he's talking about labeling, he says for most people, it's an awkward tool to use. And he goes on to say that this takes practice. I mean, you have to really think through this. And that's where I think I've read a lot of books. And you all have read a lot of books. I recommend a lot of books. But when you really spend time with this material, I believe that this is very powerful stuff. And it's stuff that, you know, I could see me spending a lot more time really trying to delve in and almost creating a guide. Like, how can you use this? Like, in these particular situations, first of all, how am I using it now that I didn't realize I was using it? And then second of all, how can I use it in the future to better? Like, what are those weaknesses? What are the things that I need to point out to be a part of the audit? Going through this exercise, I think, is really powerful for us. What else, guys?
I'm just thinking like the tool to be able to do mirroring and labeling is in that badass book, Jen Sincero's badass book. She says, make your brain your bitch. And I would say that, and she suggests meditation to do that, to be able to slow your brain down and control your thoughts. And we have, in order to do any of this, you have to be able to stop and listen. And not, even if you're being attacked, to not defend and until, you know what I mean? Like to not have that panic situation and to control your thoughts. You have to be able to control your mind. So I would just say meditation.
Do you guys,
or whatever.
Do you guys ever apologize for something that you really shouldn't have necessarily apologized for? Right. So that's the other thing, 2/3 of the way down on this page here is next time you have to apologize for a bonehead mistake, go right at it. Acknowledge the negative and diffuse it. And diffusing it is the fastest way to establish a working relationship. I guess it's probably not going to.
Your mistake, but if you're constantly apologizing for something that you didn't do, I think that's like a false.
I do it every day.
Yeah,
I do.
I apologize for things that these guys do every day.
Well, but that's you. But I'm saying, yeah. But that's your baby. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but if you're like apologizing for the contractor or the lender or whatever, that
No,
you.
I get that, but an apology goes a long way, again, for creating that, again, it's another tactic for you for them to know that you understand them. You understand that they're and it could be, I'm sorry for that, this may be why that happened, or here's some more information you need to know, I'm sorry you feel that way.
It diffuses.
sorry you're.
Yes.
I think that's what. Sorry you don't understand.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
When you're talking about like, oh, I shouldn't be apologizing for that. Well, that's where mirroring, and that's where those other traits come into play a lot. It's not apologizing necessarily for things that aren't you, right?
Right.
You're hearing them. You're getting to the part that is you, right? Like,
Right.
there is some part in there that is you and them in that moment. It is mirroring.
I just like to say, I get that, instead of I apologize. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like if they hear, I'm sorry.
But without saying.
Right. What they're saying, what he's saying though is when we say things like "I understand" and "I get that," that can be patronizing. That is, you have to be careful. It's how you say that. I mean, sometimes it's what you say.
Yeah.
It's also how you say it, and so these tools, and that's where it's like it becomes very subtle. The things that really work. And I'm not suggesting you should just be the king apologizer, but there is a place for it in which, some people can't apologize.
Well, he says.
Some people have no ability to apologize. And that's a problem.
So there's example.
Well, yeah, you have to think about your phraseology, and he talks about it in a couple of his live presentations, and it was just up there really briefly. When you're mirroring and you say, I'm sorry, that is a really soft, broad, open-ended. You're not really apologizing for something. It's more of a common thing. But if you really have to get in front of something, use the word apologize or get raw and say, you know what, I'm an asshole, or whatever it takes. But know the difference between mirroring, I'm sorry, versus actually saying, I apologize. Because if you apologize to someone, if you say that word, it carries more impact than saying, sorry.
Like what Kim said, I think I'm sorry is sometimes it's the magic words to diffuse something.
For sure.
And that goes with personality.
And it goes deep inside where people realize that you're on the same page with them.
Well,
and you're understanding
I
them.
think I just had this first time home buyer who was always very emotional. She'd probably call me up crying. I would tell her on the phone, I'm like, okay, let's take a deep breath here. And it had nothing to do with anything about the deal. It was always about like her landlord or something else. But once I could tell her just to take a deep breath, what's the situation, what's the problem, she always calmed down. And she was ready to like throw in the deal and didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So.
Quick question.
Sure.
This, don't say to somebody, I understand, which is what they're saying. So, and I always say that, I totally understand what you're going through or whatever, or maybe I can say I don't understand. What is everybody's, what do you do rather than saying I understand? What's your alternative? Because
I'm sorry to hear you going
that's,
through this.
It sounds like
I get it. I get what you're going through. Well, what do you do if you don't say?
I fully hear what you're saying.
Well, the I part, I think, is the part you want to
kind of like get away
He's
from
saying,
that.
it sounds like you're feeling frustrated. It sounds like you're feeling.
Here's my answer for that, Michelle. I think it's okay to say I understand, if it's more than that. If you've gone through the steps to really hear what they're saying and you genuinely do understand.
You don't just throw that out as an
No.
idea, it's more like, let's listen.
Like if I'm sitting across from someone and I'm in a heated conversation at my desk, and they let go on me, and then depending on how I say I understand, or I get you.
Right. It's like saying, I'm sorry, that you're either gonna believe it,
Yeah.
or you're like, sorry.
Yeah. He does go in. I did see another video on that where the certain phrases and the way that we say them are almost like F you.
So it's okay
Yeah.
to say.
I mean, that's people just take it psychologically. People just take it in a certain way. So I think the words I understand, as long as there's more
It's
built.
genuine, if it's genuine.
Yes, there's more built into it to where you actually truly do. You've done the mirroring. You really do. Like you can see.
They can tell that you really do.
They may be completely wrong, but you can see where they're coming from and why they think they're right.
Makes sense.
That's you're not agreeing with them. I understand what you're saying, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with what you're saying.
I think that sometimes you can also pull your own personal experiences from that, and saying I understand reminds me of something like I can relate to that.
Yeah.
And so being relatable is huge for, like, I just bought my first house, so now I'm way more relatable to my clients who understand what's going on. And so
too.
and I know what that means. So part of that, like I've kind of learned, since buying a house, I'm more relatable to them, so I kind of understand a little bit more. So in certain times, I'll say, oh, I can relate to that because that happened, to me, or so kind of taking like a personal side to that.
We should just call it for what it is. That really sucks.
Yeah. I said that too.
Yeah.
So there's probably only one person around the table that knows what the word amygdala means.
Was it me?
No, it wasn't you.
You're thinking Jamie Steinson?
I'm thinking Jamie Steinson would be the only person who knows what that is. Did you know what that word was?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Oh,
So-
Don't ask me to.
Anybody else in the room know what that word is?
I do, because I have friends who talk about it all the time.
It doesn't even look like a real word.
Okay, so I don't even know how you say Amy. How do you say it? Amygdala? Amygdala.
Amygdala.
Amygdala. Okay. So it's the part of the brain that generates fear and reaction to threat. The faster we can interrupt that thought, it's actually a part of the brain. Like there's a lobe in your brain that I looked it up. Bit of trivia for you. That controls this action. So the faster we can interrupt that portion of the brain, that reaction to real or imaginary threats, keyword being imaginary threats. Most of the time, the threats we experience are imaginary, not real. The faster we can clear the road of obstacles and the quicker we can generate feelings of safety, well-being, and trust. We do that by labeling the fears. Thought that was very powerful to understand.
So
Yes.
I wanted to weigh in because
Yeah.
my background is in health coaching, so that's like the brain part, the psychology part, that's some of my background too. So while I'm new to here, that's some of whatever, just a little backstory. But when in health coaching we talk about summarizing what people are saying and pulling the big picture from the conversation and then presenting a bouquet of the big picture. And so when you're talking about labeling, like one of the things I do just in coaching, right, is just summarizing what they are feeling. Like, so what I'm hearing you say is, an obstacle for you in your health goals is X, Y, Z, so just like we're talking about giving a voice to the fear or to the roadblock or the obstacle, and then taking that information and creating a bouquet and a summary of the big picture of why this is your vision, these are the obstacles, and this is why we're not getting there, So it just,
Good way of putting it.
Yes.
Really good.
And I think that has a lot to do with so when you were saying, well, why is the word I understand so negative? Is if you've ever tried, and why summary really works is, have you ever tried to really communicate your own emotions and how complicated, and like if I ask you right now, like, hey, communicate all your emotions to me.
I start crying.
I am really upset right now.
If I responded to like 2 sentences or 3 sentences, I understand. You'd be like, don't know you don't, like.
How do you know?
You don't get me?
I don't even understand me.
I don't care how much I've spoken, I haven't truly gotten it all out there, so the best you have is saying, this is what it seems like I'm hearing, or here's what I've gotten, the picture that I've gotten from your words, like, this is all I've got, I don't know you.
This is what it seems like.
This is what it seems like, and that's where that word becomes really dangerous. It's
So it's
cutting
like
it.
your conversations with drunk people.
I understand you want another Beyond Killer margarita, but.
Interestingly, with coaching
So you
too,
can't form a sentence.
yeah, with coaching too, is when you give advice, you ask permission. So you say, would you like to hear some things that have helped for someone else, or would you like to hear some of my past experience? Because most of the time, we have 2 ears and we have 1 mouth. Most of the time, it's just about letting them speak and then just going, okay, well, now you're ready to hear advice. Most people don't want health advice. They want to work through the conflicts in their life to figure out why I'm not doing the thing that we all know that we're supposed to be doing. So anyway, just translating.
Yeah, awesome.
Totally
Awesome
makes
stuff.
sense. Totally makes sense. And positive psychology is asking the question so that I think that I got there. So as a coach, you're asking the question so that you think you got to he wants the wedge salad because he came up with the idea, not me telling him he should have the wedge salad.
Let them make it honor.
Okay, one last, I just want to get, okay. I guess the one last thought that I had here on this was that remember that we are dealing with people who want to be appreciated and understood. Okay? I think that's first and foremost. If we can keep that on our mind in our interactions, whether that person is irate, whether that person is non-decisive, they can't make a decision, that buyer that just it's their 12th visit with them, whatever it is, if we focus on the fact that they have a need to be appreciated and understood, we're gonna be way ahead of the game. But
I was just gonna say, one of the things that I always, when I'm getting in a conflict with somebody, I have somebody on the phone that's like, a seller that's unhappy about whatever's happening or whatever, and the deal. And one of the things I always say is, look, we are all in the best position here. We have a seller who wants to sell, a buyer who wants to buy. We're all working toward a common goal. That's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Let's make this happen.
Yeah.
You have a common goal, you step back from all this, nonsense stuff.
right,
We all want to do the same thing.
right.
But people forget that, and that kind of, try to remember to reiterate that to everybody. Hold on, and that's one of the things that.
I always use the word team system too.
Yeah,
I use team all the time. I can't give advice, I can't do anything like that, but I'm on your team. And if we all work together, we can
Right.
all achieve
Absolutely.
that. If we're all gonna be doing this, we're not gonna get to where we all want.
And we all have a common goal. We all want this deal to close, right? This is seller, right? This is buyer. I mean, that's the thing.
I don't get paid until it closes.
Exactly.
So the next week, okay, which happens to be a holiday, but I still would like to have a meeting. I mean those of you that aren't working that day, if you're not working, you could always come in on the it's Martin Luther King Day. So are we all in agreement that we should go ahead and do it next week?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, good. So those that aren't working, if you can't make it, then same time, 9 o'clock. Yeah, we're going to continue on. There was a suggestion that afternoon might be better. What do you guys think about that? Is morning better or afternoon? You like afternoon better? You like afternoon? Show of hands for morning. Okay. And then show of hands for afternoon. Okay, so it seems like morning is well. Is there any other wrap up? Did you guys? I found huge value in this. I hope you did find value in this. Hearing your perspective and the little stories. I think next week, as we explore Beware of Yes, okay, this is going to be this chapter is going to be a really challenging chapter for us because we are trained to get to yeses. Okay, we are trained in getting people to agree and be and seek yeses. And the power of this program teaches differently than going after yeses. And so we'll have some very interesting conversations, I think, next week about experience. I think as we look, we're going to do chapters 4 and 5 next week. Is that what I told you guys?
Yeah.
So as you read those 2 chapters, let's think about how really it applies to us in the real estate industry. Okay, so we can have these kinds of meaningful, the tips and the ideas and the things that get thrown out by each of you, you can feed off of each other. And I think that's where the real value is in this, where we have that practical stuff that we can take these principles and use them to improve our negotiations. And then later today, this will be available on YouTube. So if you want to go back and listen to it, or you know something struck you that you didn't get written down, or whoever, I mean, there's going to be information that would be there that might be helpful to you or useful to you. Okay, so 9 o'clock next week we'll pick up the next 2 chapters. Thank you. Yes. Everybody.